Donald Trump, the newly installed president of the United States, has made clear to anyone who is not, I'm afraid, painfully naive, that the current so-called ceasefire in Gaza will end, that Israel's genocidal onslaught will not only resume, but will be escalated. Let's have a listen.
Then are you, Mr. President, that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the 3 phases of the deal?
I'm not confident. That's not our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident. But I think they're very weakened on the other side.
Do you support the 2-state?
Gaza, boy, I looked at a picture of Gaza. Gaza is like a massive demolition site. That place it's really got to be rebuilt in a different way.
Do you plan to help rebuilding Gaza?
I might. You know, Gaza's interesting. It's a phenomenal location. On the sea, best weather. You know, everything's good. It's like some beautiful things could be done with it, but it's very interesting. But some fantastic things could be done with Gaza.
How do you see the future in governance for Gaza?
Well, it depends. I can't imagine you could have... Well, you certainly can't have the people that were there. Most of them are dead.
Now, look, first of all, the jubilation of the Palestinian people in Gaza at the ceasefire was a beautiful sight to behold. They've suffered so much, and any respite in that unimaginable suffering has to be welcomed. And the fact that a ceasefire deal was struck, which was the same ceasefire deal which has been around almost since the start of this mayhem, is a damning indictment of Joe Biden, who refused to use the leverage he had, not least Israel being dependent on US weapons in order to conduct its slaughter. Indeed, the Qatari Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, told Sky News on Friday that the deal followed the same framework as the one agreed in December 2023.
This is the framework that we have signed 2 days ago. It's the same framework that we agreed on in December 23, which is basically 13 months of a waste of negotiating details that has no meaning and doesn't worth any single life that we lost in Gaza, or any single life of those hostages that lost their life because of the bombing, because they are among everyone now.
That does not mean Trump is a peacemaker. Note the language he uses in that clip. You see, Trump tries to present himself as the peace candidate. When I went to his rallies in Rust Belt states in the build-up to his election in November, that was one of his selling points for his supporters, about not embroiling the United States in foreign wars. That's why he says in this clip about Gaza, I'm not confident. That's not our war. It's their war. That's what he's saying in terms of the prospects of a ceasefire holding. He is accepting Gaza from the wars he's talking about disentangling the US from or avoiding. He's saying it doesn't count in that tally. And he's saying that because when he says he's not confident about a ceasefire holding, he knows full well that Israel plans to resume its genocidal onslaught when it believes there is an opportune moment. Now, first of all, is it even a ceasefire? How do you define ceasefire? Now, for me, I don't know about you, the clue really is in the word itself, ceasefire. But the Israeli military has not ceased firing. Yesterday, near Al-Wada Square in central Rafah, the Israeli occupying forces shot and killed 15-year-old Zakaria Babak as he rode on a donkey. When another man was filmed trying to drag his body away, the Israeli military fired on him as well. This is a thought experiment which I have been forced to indulge ever since this genocidal carnage began, one you should deeply resent, because I'm compelled to do so simply because Palestinian life is treated as utterly worthless. So apologies in advance. But just imagine for one moment that Palestinian militants had just shot dead a 15-year-old Israeli boy riding a donkey, and then there was footage of an Israeli man trying to rescue that body, who was then shot at by those same Palestinian militants. Imagine the deluge of outrage in Western media outlets and amongst Western politicians. Would anyone treat that as a ceasefire being respected and remaining in place? Of course they wouldn't, because they would treat Israeli life as having value, just as they treat Palestinian life as having no value, as having the worth approximating the common house fly. So with the current so-called ceasefire, note the extremists who surround Trump. His pick for US ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, doesn't believe there is any such thing as a Palestinian. Trump has just lifted the pause on £2,000 bombs to Israel, which were repeatedly dropped on so-called safe zones for Palestinians. Miriam Adelson, the Israeli-American billionaire, gave Trump $100 million for his election campaign, and she reportedly urged Trump to back the annexation of the West Bank in exchange for her backing. Note, she had pride of place at his inauguration. In the West Bank itself, now the pogrom against Palestinians is escalating, with terrorist settlers attacking and burning Palestinian villages and vehicles, while the Israeli army blocks entrances to Palestinian cities. And crucially, according to Israeli media reports, Trump promised Netanyahu that if they agreed to a ceasefire and the withdrawal of the IDF forces from Gaza, he will support Israel retroactively if it decides to return to fighting and violate the ceasefire. According to the well-connected Axios media outlet, and I quote, Netanyahu said during the meeting that he received guarantees from both the Biden administration and the Trump administration that if negotiations over the second phase of the ceasefire and hostage deal fail and Israel's security demands are not met, Israel would be able to resume the war in Gaza with US backing, a Netanyahu aide tells Axios. Indeed, to further quote from them, sources in Smotrich's party, and that's Smotrich, of course, being one of the far-right extremists in that coalition, sources in Smotrich's party claimed he received assurances from Netanyahu that the war would resume after the initial 42-day ceasefire and the humanitarian aid delivery for Gaza would be changed to prevent Hamas from controlling the aid, which is just a euphemism for justifying the besieging of the aid, of the basic humanitarian aid that people rely on to survive. And indeed, to quote from the Times of Israel, during a high-level meeting last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told those present that Israel will resume fighting after a hostage deal if one comes about. Channel 12 reports, that's the TV channel in Israel. If there is a deal, he says, and I hope there will be, Israel will return to fighting afterwards. There is no point in pretending otherwise because returning to fighting is needed in order to complete the goals of the war. Saying that does not thwart a deal, it encourages a deal. That's Channel 12 quoting Netanyahu there. Well, I mean, what more to say, really? The idea that Donald Trump, who bent over backwards to accommodate the demands of the Israeli right last time he was president, e.g. moving the capital of Israel to Jerusalem, the extremists around Donald Trump and Netanyahu and those around Netanyahu now plan peace for Gaza is, I'm afraid, just beyond delusional. And what was Trump talking about? How Gaza looks like a massive demolition site, but he says it's a phenomenal location on the sea, best weather, some beautiful things could be done with it. Was he talking about redeveloping it for the benefit of the Palestinian people of Gaza to whom Gaza belongs? Let's recall what was said by Jared Kushner, his nephew and advisor in the first term, who was the main architect of Trump's so-called Israeli-Palestinian peace deal last time, which in practice was just executing the fantasies of the Israeli right. Nearly a year ago, Kushner said Gaza's waterfront property could be very valuable. And what did he say about the prospect of Palestinians returning to their homes?
But also there are real fears on the part of Arabs, and I'm sure you talk to a lot of them, who think once Gazans leave Gaza, Netanyahu's never going to let them back in.
Maybe, but I'm not sure there's much left of Gaza.
Well, it's clear he has no interest in the idea of them returning to their homes. And the basis for it is, well, Gaza's gone anyway. It's been wiped out. And that was last April. Well, it's clear what could beckon here. The ethnic cleansing of Gaza, presented as unavoidable, given Gaza has been destroyed, and then Gaza redeveloped and colonised by Israeli settlements. That's clearly the game plan of the Israeli right. You cannot say you were not warned. Trump will not bring peace to Gaza and Palestine, clearly, far from it. And here's a prediction too. Trump's allies are planning a crackdown on pro-Palestinian protests. If there is a renewed genocidal onslaught against Gaza, then protests will inevitably break out across the United States. That may well be used to justify a whole slew of authoritarian measures to roll back US democracy. Well, the so-called moderates of the US paved the way for that by facilitating the genocide and then demonising those protesting against it. It may well prove they weren't just the gravediggers of Gaza. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts, your comments, press like, all of that is good for the algorithm, it means more people listen. Spread the video, share the video.